Oh, I love a good referendum. Abso-blimmin-lutely. If we hadn't had a referendum on our membership of the European Union, we absolutely would still be members of it. Why? Well, because the political class were completely out of touch with the country on a fundamental constitutional question. So let's begin this debate tonight on whether there should be a referendum on net zero with that very big question: are we a country that ought to have referendums or referenda, depending on your choice, on these issues? And joining me in the studio is Sean Spears, Executive Director of the Green Alliance and former Chief Executive of the Council for the Protection of Rural England. And down the line, joining me, Red Waller, Scott Benson, Conservative, Member of Parliament for Blackpool South. On the big constitutional stuff, Sean, you know, I, of course, was agitating for that EU referendum for, what, about a quarter of a century or something like that. And we had the referendum, and it was interesting that actually the country was in a different place on that issue to Westminster. Would it be appropriate to have a referendum, in your opinion, on an issue like this?
I just think it's a really bad idea. I saw Craig McKinley in the Telegraph saying it's a complex issue. It really is a complex issue, and a complex issue with one question.
Sorry, are you saying people are too stupid to vote on complex things?
Well, you ask one question about something that's multifaceted. How does that work?
Yes, but it's about a principle. It's about a direction in which we're going, isn't it?
Yes, it is, but also there's no evidence whatsoever that people don't want net zero. I mean, climate is polling third in terms of public concern at the moment. Every country around the world is going for net zero. The Swiss just had a referendum on it, which they rejected.
Let's come to the subject.
Yeah.
Just on the big point, you know, critics of this would say that direct democracy, outsourcing big decisions to the public, be they straightforward or complex questions, that no, this is the job that a representative parliament does, and that if we do this, we become Switzerland. Where would you sit on that?
I think I'd agree with that. I think it would be very divisive, and we'd lose years of the energy that needs to go into tackling the climate change, which people are so worried about, arguing about whether we have a referendum, what the question should be.
Well, Scott Benson, you're a relative new boy in Parliament, a 2019 Red Waller. Do you think it would be appropriate to have a referendum on an issue like this?
Good evening, Nigel. Well, we saw in 2016 that politicians such as yourself were light years ahead of the Westminster bubble when it came to leaving the European Union. And I'm afraid that net zero, once again, is an issue where my constituents, who are paying through the nose with the high cost of energy, are years ahead of politicians. When you ask my constituents, do you support net zero? Of course, they say yes. However, when you ask them, with the costs involved, are you prepared to meet these costs as a household to achieve net zero? Their answer then changes to absolutely not. And I'm afraid if we leave this issue in the hands of the Westminster bubble, then we'll be waiting years and years for change. I'm pleased to see a bit of the political prevailing wind has changed following the Uxbridge by-election, but it's not enough. Why not put this issue to the people and let them decide?
Scott Benson makes a very powerful point, Sean, which is actually, as all the parties are committed to this, as it's been signed into law, amazing, Theresa May signed it into law without even having a vote in the House of Commons, that we're committed to a rolling series of 5-year plans, that actually, if I'm a voter at the next election and I've got grave reservations, not about the climate debate, but about what we're doing in the name of the climate debate, I can't register a protest against that, can I?
Well, you could vote for. The Brexit Party was the only party last time that said no to it, and they got 2% of the vote. So they were Everybody else stood for it. People like Scott signed up to their manifesto.
When the realistic choice,
tried to fight the.
When the realistic choice of who is going to form the next government of the United Kingdom is the Labour or Conservative Party, and you know, maybe the Lib Dems could be in a coalition. It's unlikely. Maybe the SNP, even more unlikely. When realistically, in 85% plus of the country, you're going to get a Tory or Labour MP. Yeah. And when both of them are signed up to net zero, unless we have a referendum, there's no way of having a proper public debate, is there?
No, but there are debates within the parties, and there's a debate at the moment within the Conservative Party. Scott and others are saying no.
But no choice for the electorate.
Well, if there will be a choice if the Conservative Party choose to go against net zero. The problem is they know from polling that a quarter of their votes will be lost.
No, but they won't do it. They won't
do it because people want it.
No, they won't do it because They've signed it into law. The big point I'm trying to get
change, Nigel.
The big point I'm trying to get to here is we get situations in this country where there is a political consensus in Westminster, a media consensus in mainstream media, and for people out there who disagree, what can they do? What can they do?
They can, yeah, I mean, you can argue for a referendum if you want.
Well, I think I almost am in this conversation. Scott, I mean, you know, Sean makes the point there is a debate now going on within the Conservative Party, but let's be frank, those of you that are sceptical about the cost, and frankly the cost to ordinary folk, of net zero policies, you're very much a minority in the Tory party, aren't you?
That's sadly very much so, Nigel. Sadly, we are. There's a number of people, Craig McKinley foremost among us, who are making these debates week in, week out. I would hope the Prime Minister would take a long, hard look at the Uxbridge by-election. I think that provides a golden opportunity to change the political dial on this issue. And what my constituents are crying out for is support with the costs, particularly of energy bills. And I think if it was a Conservative government who was listening to hard-working people who are concerned about the transition to net zero, because let's be honest, it's those people in low-income households who are disproportionately paying through the nose for the transition to net zero. If the Prime Minister were to look again at this issue, and indeed the proposed ban on new cars by 2030, I think he could potentially reap the reward at the ballot box. So I do hope the Prime Minister and other senior public members of the Cabinet are listening. But frankly, Nigel, thank goodness you are here and GB News is here making the case for this issue, as you do on so many others.
Well, actually, what we're doing, Scott, is we're having a debate on it. And I'm with you, but, I mean, we're not exactly going to cut Sean Spears out of this conversation.
If I can just come back on a couple of those points.
Yeah,
ULEZ is interesting, but ULEZ is an air pollution policy. It's
rubbish.
Clean
Absolute rubbish.
Well, I don't think Sadiq Khan's ever said it's about net zero. It's about stopping people dying prematurely of air pollution.
Which is absolute rubbish.
Well,
you go out to Outer London, where I live, there's no air quality problem at all.
But that's what the policy is about. It's not a net zero policy. So let's park that one. I'll have a debate about ULEZ another time.
But equally, it's the poor that pay.
Yeah, well, we can debate ULEZ. But on energy policy, the reason that Scots constituents are suffering so badly is because we wasted years not decarbonising, not using cheaper renewable fuel, not insulating our houses, and the 3/4 of the drop in inflation we've just seen is down to falling gas prices. It's expensive gas and our reliance on fossil fuels.
Did you notice, Sean? Did you notice, Sean, this morning at about 9 o'clock, how much of our energy grid was being fuelled by wind?
Yes, I did, because I see your tweets. And I
right, well, there you are.
Retweeting Andrew Neil's tweets.
No, I mean, almost nothing.
Yeah.
So we had to have gas and coal to back it up. Look,
but for the first quarter of the year, we were producing more. The first quarter of the year as a whole, more of our energy has come from renewables than from gas. About 10% from nuclear. And last year, it was the year as a whole, it was 40%.
But is it fair that what we've been doing for the last 20 years is putting huge lumps on people's electricity bills to subsidise renewables?
No, you should have gone on...
Is it fair? But that's what we've done, isn't it?
I think you shouldn't pay for that through people's energy bills.
Right. You are firmly opposed to a referendum on this?
I mean, I think it's a bad idea. I think it's a distraction, because I just don't see there's much support for it.
Well, OK. Sean doesn't see much support for it. Scott Benson feels, I think, very, very
And by the way, I also think that people who've been watching the news all summer and seeing the fires and the real effects of climate change want to roll out the sleeves and do something about it.
We've had fires going on for thousands of years. Scott Benson, let me give you the last word on this. He's gone.
Thank you, Nigel. Absolutely. We've spoken about how it's my constituents paying through the nose of this. I think if there were to be a referendum, we would see a disconnect between the liberal Westminster elite and ordinary people, and I'm sure they would vote with their heart to save themselves thousands of pounds per year through energy bills. But if we are serious about having more referenda, such as nations like Switzerland, then why not stop? Why just stop, for example, at net zero? Why not look at issues such as the ECHR? There's a debate in the Conservative Party
at the moment. I'd love it.
Whether or not we need to do that to stop the vote. So let's have more referenda and let's see what the people have to say on these key issues.
Let's have representative democracy.
Representative democracy. Final word, Sean Spears, quickly. Representative democracy is fine if our representatives and parties have different opinions. If they all agree on everything, it isn't much cop, is it, really?
Well, it just might be they're all right.
No, they're not. Sean Smith, always a spirited debate.